This was supposed to be a routine court appearance, nothing more. Tommaso Cioni arrived on time, took his seat, and for a few minutes, everything moved exactly as expected. The judge began the proceedings, lawyers prepared their notes, and it looked like just another controlled hearing. But then something happened that no one in that room was ready for. A document, one that hadn't been discussed publicly, was suddenly introduced during the session. At first, it didn't seem unusual. But within seconds, the reaction inside the courtroom started to change. One of the attorneys leaned in and said quietly, "This wasn't part of the file." Another responded, "Then how did it get here?" There was a brief pause. The judge looked down, reviewed the document again, and didn't dismiss it. That's when the tension became impossible to ignore. People who were present say the room went unusually quiet. Not dramatic, just off. As if something had shifted that no one fully understood yet. And in the middle of that moment, Tommaso Cioni reacted, but not in the way you would expect. He didn't argue. He didn't interrupt. He simply looked up and smiled slightly. And that small reaction is now raising much bigger questions. To understand why that moment in the courtroom is now being talked about everywhere, you have to look at who Tommaso Cioni is and, more importantly, what was already building long before that hearing ever took place. On the surface, Cioni was known as a low-profile but highly connected figure in international business circles. Not a celebrity, not someone constantly in the media, but the kind of person whose name quietly carried weight behind closed doors. People who worked around him often described him as careful, calculated, and extremely controlled. He didn't speak much publicly, and when he did, it was always measured. But over the past few months, things around him started to shift. It reportedly began with a private deal involving multiple parties. Details were never made public, but according to several industry insiders, that agreement collapsed under unclear circumstances. Normally, deals fall apart all the time. It's not unusual. But this one didn't end quietly. One source claimed, after that deal failed, communication just stopped. Not gradually, immediately. Emails went unanswered. Scheduled meetings were canceled without explanation. And certain individuals who were previously connected to the situation suddenly stepped back completely. At first, it didn't attract much attention. There was no official statement, no public dispute. Just silence. Then small pieces of information started appearing online. Anonymous posts began hinting at an internal issue tied to Cioni's professional circle. Nothing confirmed, nothing detailed, but enough to raise questions. Some suggested there were disagreements behind the scenes. Others hinted at something more serious, though no one could clearly explain what. A legal consultant, speaking off record, reportedly said there was definitely something going on, but no one wanted to be the first to say it publicly. Because when the court hearing was suddenly scheduled, it didn't feel like a normal legal step. There was no build-up, no clear explanation, just a filing that quickly turned into a confirmed appearance. And the speed of it all stood out. Within a short period, what started as quiet speculation turned into a formal courtroom situation. Access around the courthouse became more controlled, and even media presence was reportedly limited without clear reason. By the time the hearing date arrived, there was already a sense that this wasn't just about a simple case. Something had been building quietly for a while. And whatever it was, it hadn't fully come out yet. The courtroom hearing was expected to move in a straight, predictable line. Opening remarks, procedural updates, basic arguments, and then a scheduled conclusion. That was the expectation. But almost nothing about that day followed expectations. From the moment proceedings formally began, the atmosphere inside the room felt different. It wasn't loud. It wasn't chaotic. It was controlled, but in a way that made people uneasy. Even experienced court staff reportedly noticed it. One clerk later described it as too quiet for a case like this. Tommaso Cioni sat through the opening minutes without showing any visible reaction. Calm posture, steady expression, no signs of stress. But observers noted that the legal teams representing both sides were noticeably tense. Papers were being adjusted repeatedly. Short, quiet exchanges were happening between attorneys that didn't seem planned. Then came the first disruption. Midway through the procedural statements, a folder was introduced into the record that had not been mentioned during earlier filings. There was no prior explanation, no public listing. It simply appeared as part of the materials being reviewed. One attorney immediately raised a concern. This document was not shared in discovery, they said. Another responded quickly, almost overlapping their voice. It's been added recently. We need clarification on its origin. That single exchange changed the energy in the room. The judge paused. Not briefly, but long enough for everyone to notice. Pages were reviewed again. The courtroom staff exchanged silent looks. Something was clearly not aligned with the expected case structure. And then came the first twist. According to individuals present inside the courtroom, the newly introduced document contained references that extended beyond the original scope of the hearing. Not direct accusations, but indirect connections, names, entities, and communications that had not been publicly associated with the case before. One observer described it as a widening of the entire situation in real time. The legal teams reacted immediately. One attorney stood up and requested that parts of the document be excluded from consideration until verification could be completed. Another demanded an emergency review of how the material entered the case file. But the judge did not dismiss it. Instead, after a brief pause, the judge allowed the document to remain under review. That decision alone shifted everything. At that moment, the hearing stopped feeling like a routine legal process. It started feeling like an unfolding situation with unknown depth. And that's when things escalated further. According to multiple accounts, a portion of the document referenced communications linked to individuals within Cioni's broader professional environment. Nothing directly confirming wrongdoing, but enough to create immediate speculation about involvement beyond a single isolated event. That's when the first wave of visible reaction began. Lawyers who had been composed earlier were now speaking in lower, urgent tones. One was seen requesting an immediate sidebar with the judge. Another was rapidly reviewing printed materials, clearly searching for inconsistencies. Meanwhile, Tommaso Cioni remained unusually still. No interruption. No visible frustration. No emotional reaction. Just observation. And that calmness, rather than reassuring anyone, actually increased tension in the room. Because it didn't match the situation unfolding around him. Then came the moment that shifted everything into a more intense direction. During a brief pause ordered by the judge, additional internal communication reportedly reached courtroom staff. No official announcement was made, but movement inside the room changed instantly. Phones were checked. Documents were quietly exchanged between officials. Security presence subtly increased at the back of the courtroom. Something had changed again, but no one was saying what. And just when it seemed like things had reached their peak tension, the second twist arrived. A source inside the courthouse later claimed that parts of the document had been updated shortly before being submitted. Not fully replaced, but modified. This claim spread quickly, though it was never officially confirmed. Still, the impact was immediate. Because now the issue was no longer just what the document contained. It was whether the version being reviewed in court was even the original one. And that question turned the entire hearing into something far more unstable than anyone had expected. The moment that claim about modified documents began circulating inside the courthouse, the entire tone of the hearing changed again. What had started as a controlled legal proceeding was now drifting into something far more unstable, where even small details suddenly felt significant. Inside the courtroom, the judge called for a brief procedural pause. But instead of calming things down, the pause only increased the tension. Attorneys on both sides were seen urgently reviewing documents again, as if trying to confirm what version of the information they were actually working with. Then came the escalation. According to multiple attendees, court staff began receiving internal updates that were not shared publicly in the room. Subtle movements followed, documents being collected, whispered instructions, and restricted access folders being moved between officials without explanation. One observer described it as everyone inside could feel something was being adjusted in real time, but no one was being told what. Outside the courtroom, things were moving even faster. Within minutes, anonymous posts began appearing online claiming that multiple versions of the same sealed file existed. One version allegedly used for official review, another circulated internally, and a third that had never been officially logged into the court system. Nothing was confirmed, but the timing of these claims made them impossible to ignore. And then came the reveal that changed the direction of the entire narrative. A leaked message, reportedly shared by an anonymous source tied to the courthouse environment, suggested that certain references inside the document pointed to broader associations beyond the original case focus. The wording was vague, but the implication was enough to trigger immediate speculation. The idea that this case might not be isolated anymore, combined with the suggestion of document inconsistency, shifted public perception instantly. Back inside the courtroom, the reaction was subtle but noticeable. Legal representatives were no longer just focused on arguments. They were focused on verification. Every page, every reference, every timestamp suddenly mattered. And through all of it, Tommaso Cioni remained silent. No objections, no clarification, no emotional response. That silence became its own kind of signal. Because now the question wasn't just what was in the document. It was how many versions existed and who controlled them. And as the hearing moved toward its next phase, it was clear that whatever came next would not stay contained inside the courtroom for long. The moment fragments of the courtroom situation began leaking online, the reaction outside the courthouse escalated faster than anyone expected. What had started as a controlled legal hearing quickly transformed into a global talking point, driven almost entirely by speculation, partial information, and conflicting claims. On social media, the story spread in waves. At first, users simply reacted to the idea of a sealed document being introduced mid-hearing. But as more alleged details surfaced, the conversation became increasingly divided. One group of users insisted the situation was being misunderstood, arguing that courtroom procedures often involve confidential materials. Another group, however, believed something far more serious was unfolding behind closed doors. Hashtags connected to Tommaso Cioni began trending across multiple platforms within hours. Posts ranged from analytical breakdowns to highly emotional reactions. Some users were zooming in on every available detail, trying to interpret body language, courtroom timing, and even the smallest reported reactions from legal staff. One viral post read, "If multiple versions of the same document really exist, then this isn't just a case anymore, it's a system failure." Meanwhile, others pushed back strongly, calling the situation exaggerated and warning against treating unverified leaks as fact. This split created a growing online divide, with discussions turning increasingly intense. Industry voices also began to react cautiously. A few legal commentators described the situation as unusually complex for a single hearing, pointing out that claims of document inconsistency, if even partially true, would raise serious procedural concerns. However, most professionals avoided making direct statements, emphasizing that no confirmed court findings had been officially released. Despite that caution, speculation continued to grow. Entertainment and business commentators started weighing in as well, treating the case less as a legal matter and more as a developing public controversy. Some questioned why access around the courthouse had reportedly been restricted. Others focused on the unusual silence from official channels, noting that in high-profile cases, even basic clarifications are usually issued quickly. But in this situation, there was none. No official breakdown. No public clarification. No direct response from key figures involved. That silence became one of the most discussed elements of the entire story. And as reactions intensified, one thing became clear across all platforms: the narrative was no longer controlled by the courtroom. It was being shaped outside it, in real time, by interpretation, speculation, and fragmented information. And with no clear answers coming forward, the uncertainty only continued to grow. Just when it seemed like the situation inside the courthouse had reached its peak confusion, the final phase of the hearing took an unexpected turn that no one was prepared for. According to multiple unverified but rapidly spreading accounts, the court did not resume proceedings in the way everyone expected after the pause. Instead, there was a delay longer than usual, unexplained, and noticeably tense. Court staff were seen moving quickly between restricted areas, while legal teams were reportedly waiting without clear instructions. Then came the announcement that shifted everything again. Sources inside the environment claimed that part of the case had been temporarily placed under additional review due to verification concerns. The wording was careful, but its impact was immediate. It suggested that certain materials being discussed during the hearing required further confirmation before the process could continue. And that alone changed the direction of the entire narrative once more. Because now, the focus was no longer just on what the document contained, it was on whether the materials presented in court could be fully validated at that stage. But the most shocking claim surfaced shortly after. An alleged internal update began circulating online suggesting that an additional attachment existed within the case file, one that had not been referenced during the hearing at all. According to the claim, this attachment contained information that had not yet been introduced into official proceedings and may not have been reviewed by all parties present. If true, this meant the courtroom had only seen part of the picture. Not the full file. Not the full context. Just fragments. Inside the courtroom, confusion reportedly returned. Legal representatives were seen reviewing documents again, while officials attempted to maintain order during the delay. Security presence reportedly increased once more, though no official explanation was given. And through all of this, one detail stood out more than anything else. Tommaso Cioni still had not made a public statement. Not during the hearing, not during the pause, and not after the leaks began spreading beyond the courthouse. That silence now feels heavier than ever. Because in situations like this, silence does not remain neutral. It becomes part of the story itself. And as the courtroom remains under uncertainty, one final question now lingers without answer. If there truly is another undisclosed layer to this case, then what else has not been seen yet? And more importantly, when will it finally come out? Now at this point, the situation is bigger than just a courtroom hearing. What started inside those four walls has now turned into a global discussion, with people everywhere trying to understand what is real, what is missing, and what is still being hidden. And honestly, this is where your opinion matters the most. Do you think this was just a normal legal process that got misunderstood and overhyped online? Or do you believe there is something deeper going on behind the scenes that has not been fully revealed yet? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because the debate around this case is only getting stronger, and every new perspective is adding more layers to the story. If you want the next update, you already know what to do. Like this video so it reaches more people, and subscribe to stay connected because the situation is still developing. And here's the real question everyone is asking right now. If more information comes out next, will it clear everything up or make the mystery even bigger? Stay tuned, because whatever happens next could completely change the direction of this entire story.